Hey everybody, happy Hoerner happy hour. It is noon Eastern my time on Thursday, so again, not quite a happy hour here yet, but it's 5 o'clock somewhere. I'm Kate. If you're new to the group, I know we always have new people. I do this every week, Hoerner happy hour on Thursdays. The time kind of varies. It's been pretty consistently noon Eastern time, depending on what I'm doing at the studio. There are a million things going on. Our TVs broke today, our sound broke last week. There's always something, right? Anyone who's an owner knows what I'm talking about, or a manager. Anyways, so do this every week. I answer your questions that you tag me in the group throughout the week. I have a lot of experience. If you don't know me, I've been teaching for over a decade. I'm managing a studio. I was planning on starting my own. I don't know if I've told you guys that. I spent about 8 months planning to start my own. I had everything in place. I had the location, I had the financials, I had the legal, I had trademarks, I had everything. And I decided to take a step back and focus on managing for a little bit, learn as much as I could, and then eventually we'll see what happens. But I don't know if I told everyone that, so I'm glad that I finally shared that. If you are just hopping on now, you can go back and watch what I just said when the replay's up. I'm going to dive into the questions for today. We had 4, I believe. First one came from Mary. She was asking about how she can figure out whether people aren't showing up to your, or why they're not showing up to your class. So this is always tricky, right? Because people come in, they work out, they leave. They don't always tell you what they like, what they didn't like, and oftentimes they're telling you what they didn't like, which doesn't always feel good. And sometimes it's things like music, for example, which is going to vary from person to person. So it's very, very difficult. And trust me, as a studio manager, I work a lot on this, trying to figure out what brings people into a class and what brings people to a specific instructor, to a specific time slot. So this will very much depend on where you're located. So I know, for example, for our studio, our biggest times are kind of the 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, because we have a lot of those young moms who are getting their kids off to school or whatever, daycare, whatever it is, and then coming into class. So those are big for us. Not so much, the 6 a.m.s or the 6 p.m.s. Then we have, the teachers and the students who come in the afternoon, but that varies depending on what time of year it is, all of that. So if you have a time slot, I don't know what time, based on what you were saying, it seems like you threw out a few different times. I don't know when you're teaching. Saturday, 8 or 9 a.m. is always like a really solid time as well for us. But again, this might vary for you. If you teach downtown in a city, that's probably a really quiet time for you because you're probably usually getting those people who are coming in and out for work. Anyways, a few things that you can pay attention to. And by the way, summer, if it's summer wherever you are, and I think it is, because I'm pretty sure you're not too far from me, summer is hard for cycling studios. People want to get outside, especially people who are real riders or out there riding. Everyone else is on vacation. They're working out outside. They're doing all the free boot camps and whatever else is going on. So people like to get outside in the summer. It's always going to be a little bit quieter. If you're a new instructor and you just started teaching this summer, give it until October and then see what happens. It might just be the time of year and you're new. It takes people a long time, even if you're an incredible instructor. If you're brand new, people have to get in there a couple times to really see what you're about. A lot of what people like about instructors is just their steadiness. They might have been going to the same person for 10 years. That person might not be that good in our opinion, but because they're used to them, they know what they're going to get. Some people just want that. So there is a little bit of that going on. You got to give people some time to get used to you and how you teach. Mary, I know you just started, so it's going to take some time. So don't think that it's the way you're teaching, because it's probably not. Another thing that might affect that is if competition opened up nearby, and they have similar time slots as yours, and maybe they have a super experienced, very popular instructor teaching at the same time. There's just so many things. What I would say, the things that would actually help you pay attention to this is if you have the ability to look at what the numbers were for your same class and time last year, and see, again, if competition opened up, that's going to change things. But see if you're close to that, or maybe you're even better, or maybe you're worse because, again, you're new and it's going to take some time. But that would be a relatively sound way to look at it. You could look at similar time slots over the week with other instructors and see how they're doing. So if you teach, a 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, maybe look at the 7 p.m. on a Thursday and see how that's doing. You could start polling your class, or maybe even make little feedback cards and ask people to write a little bit, make them anonymous so that people can be honest. Just put them out at the front desk, ask people, wherever, I don't know how your setup is, but if you can get something that will allow people to give you some feedback, and then at the end of your class, you ask them, hey, I would really appreciate, anything you have to say to me in terms of what you liked about the class, if you're, regular to this time, if this time is difficult, all these things can help you. I've found that getting feedback from people is very valuable. Now you got to take it with a grain of salt, because some people are just going to complain because they want to complain. And they're not always going to tell you what they love. They might have loved 90% of it and didn't like 10%, and they're going to tell you about that 10%. So just be aware that when you're reading through feedback, you're going to have to weed through it. But there's a lot you can do. Honestly, I would just say keep trucking along, keep working hard on your classes. I know you're doing a great job. It's just a matter of building that rapport and getting those regulars in there, getting to the fall where things will get busier and it will get better. But keep us updated. I want to know, as you start to kind of look around and see if any of this other stuff that I mentioned is affecting your classes. I'd love to hear about it and we can talk through it. Next question, Martin asked about using colors, training with colors. So this is really cool. I've talked to a few people who have done this. It's not as popular as, one would think, I guess. The thing about teaching with color, so it's basically, as Martin was saying in his comment, an alternative to teaching with RPE, which we all know is, I hate it. I hate RP. No one understands it. There's all different scales. Just dealing with how everyone talks about it is very difficult. I personally don't use RPE. I've gotten very, very good and specific at how I describe what I want people to be feeling. And I use resistance and I use speed and all that other stuff. But it's tricky. Like I always say, explaining where people should be at in terms of how hard they're working is the hardest part of our job. So the colors idea is very interesting. I think you could, Martin, you could make this work. He was asking if you need the specific ICG bikes to be able to teach on it. So these bikes are super cool. You can look them up. ICG has bikes that basically the screen will change colors depending on what zone you're working in, which is really funky, right? But also super distracting. So keep that in mind. But you can teach with the colors. The problem is it uses, from what I understand, and I haven't taught with it, so don't take my word for it, but from what I understand, you can either teach with power or heart rate as the matchup to what the colors look like. So I don't know which color is which, but it basically goes along the same scale. A certain zone matches up with a certain color. So if you're using power, everyone would need to know their FTP, right, their functional threshold power, to be able to have their own scale. And then same thing with heart rate. Not everyone's heart rate is going to work the same way. So your class would have to be pretty advanced in terms of how they identify how hard they're working. Most places, this is not going to be the case. This is not going to be the demographic you're working with. If it is, it could be super helpful. And I imagine you could still teach with colors without knowing all these specifics, but it just wouldn't give people the class that they're looking for. It might end up being more confusing. And I just want to go back to the fact that you said you started, whatever you started doing recently and working on your queuing efforts and all that, you said it resonates with your riders. Why change it? If it's not broken, don't fix it, right? If people are understanding, what you're trying to communicate and they're getting the class that you want them to get, I wouldn't change anything. The colors, it's a really cool idea. And honestly, for you, it might be fun to do like your own personal training. We can train a little bit harder and different than the way we teach. We should. So I would do it for yourself, see how you like it, and see if once you really understand it, if that's something that you could use to teach other people, then maybe bring it in and see how you do with it. But I think they have the ICG bikes. There's also a training course. It's probably like $100 to $200 to learn how to teach with color, I would say if you're really interested in it, try that yourself, see how you like it, work with it on your own a little bit and train with it and see if you think that you can communicate it in a good way to your riders. And if that's the case, then bring it there. But I don't think if what you're doing is working, and two, if you don't totally understand how the colors thing works, the color training, I wouldn't yet bring it to your class. I would get there first and then see if it's worth it. But it is a really cool concept. I think if I had a bike that would change colors depending on how hard I'm working, it would definitely, trigger me to train a little bit differently. But there's a lot of fun things we can do with power, heart rate, colors, whatever. There's all sorts of training types that I think as instructors, we should continuously teach ourselves these things. That's what continuing ed is all about, learning more and more and more. Doesn't necessarily mean that we need to bring that exact method to our class, but I guarantee if you take that training course, you're going to learn something regardless of whether or not you bring the colors to your class. You're going to learn something that you can teach to your class. So hopefully that was helpful. Last question, or no, two more. Josette asked, well, I guess she was more commenting on the idea of colors and saying that her studio doesn't have metrics or monitors, so it gets a little tricky. I think it's hard because it's really expensive equipment, right? I mean, we all know this. If you're working for a gym that maybe doesn't have all the fancy bells and whistles, or if you're trying to start your own studio, or if you own your own studio, you know how expensive this equipment can be. And not to mention it breaks on you all the time, so you got to know how to fix it. Hey, Mary. So I think, Josette, I would just say to you, the color training, again, same thing I said to Martin, you can go back and listen to that, but there's definitely a place for the studios and the classes that don't use the monitors. I mean, look at SoulCycle. Not saying that you're going to be like a SoulCycle, but they don't touch it, at least from the couple, I only took a couple classes there, but they didn't even turn on the monitor. I don't even know if there is a monitor. I should know this, but not something I go to regularly. So I don't even think that you need to worry about that. The key is in finding a way to teach the class that keeps them so engaged that they don't think about that. So it's a little bit difficult, right? Because you're going to have a different demographic. So someone who's very into performance, maybe an athlete or used to be an athlete and wants to see those numbers, it's important for them to see it so they're accountable to themselves and they can push themselves. They're going to go to a class like a flywheel where the metrics are up on the board and they're trying to beat other people around them. And not everyone likes that. Not everyone wants that. And honestly, some people come into class and they still want to work hard. I don't like the idea that some people say, people want to come in and not look at their metrics because they don't want to work. I don't think that's true. I think often we get so focused on the numbers that we can't enjoy and we can't really push because we're too distracted by what's on our screen. I actually tend to push harder. I'll give you an example. Like when I run on a treadmill, I know exactly what speed I'm at. I know exactly, what time I'm doing and what my splits are and all that. So I focus on that and I don't really push myself. I just stay within what I need to get my workout, right? But when I run outside, I actually tend to run a whole lot faster and it feels better to me because I'm just doing what feels good, but I'm not looking at a thing. No metrics, no timing, no nothing. So I think there's something to be said about not using metrics and not being distracted by a screen in front of you the whole time. It just puts a little bit more onus on the instructor to, be entertaining and be able to coach really well, which Josette, I know that you can. So I would actually take it as a good thing. Like you don't need that. You don't need that monitor in front of you. You can do so much with it without it in your classes and people will love it. So I wouldn't focus on the fact that you're without when you think about those monitors and the performance and all that. I would say that your brand just doesn't focus on that. Kind of target people who don't need that and focus your classes on something that doesn't center around the metrics and the performance. I actually think it's a great thing personally because every studio I've seen is moving in the direction of having the screens up and having the monitors. And if you can be unique in that you don't have that, I think it's a benefit and it's a niche that is going away. So there's that. There's my rant. One more thing today. I've gotten a couple of messages actually over the past couple of weeks about dealing with kind of new riders and what are all the the boxes that you want to check to make sure that they feel comfortable. And this is key because we want them to come back, right? And we have to make them feel comfortable enough to come back. So I had a lot to say on this. I didn't want to exhaust you guys. I've already been talking for too long today, but I did write a blog on it. I linked it in here. 6 things. I could probably come up with 20, but I threw 6 in there, very detailed explanations for what I do with new riders that helps me to keep them coming back. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go check it out. I'm not going to, like I said, I don't want to waste your time talking about it because I wrote it all down. But if we have any other questions, I don't see any in the comments, so I'll just plan to answer anything else next week in Hoerner Happy Hour, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye, guys.